CX-centric conversation.
Co-creating the employee experience to drive business growth. Okay, so I'm going to quickly do you a intro to me and then we can get started. So I'm the Chief Customer Officer for MKL Innovation. I also lead the CX consulting arm of MKL, which is now known as MKL CX. You might have seen that we had one previously, which was called Canoodle, and we've now rebranded, much like Jonathan. And also I'm a director at the Customer Institute as well. Do reach out if you want to know about certification for the Customer Institute, because that's something that is free at the moment. So it's a real boon if you want to sign up to that. A few of my certifications, just so you know the credibility behind myself. So I'm certified in customer experience, CCXP, Lean Six Sigma, project program management, service delivery, and currently in my second half of a master's in business, which I'm doing at Cranfield just up the road. In terms of the employee experience point of view, since that's what I'm talking about today, I just wanted to put in why I feel I have experienced that area too. So I led a team of 40 at Home Retail Group. Home Retail Group are mainly retail, so they have several brands, 3 brands, Argos, Habitat, Homebase, and then Group. And that case study that I'm going to talk to you there was all around employee experience. And the team that I led there were called Colleague Advocates. And I'll tell you a bit more about the structure of that and some of the achievements that we had along the way. And then later on, when we get into our group, we can talk more about that. Okay, just move the poll out of the way. Okay, so CX and EX. What's the link? So I'm hoping that everybody knows when we say CX and EX, what we're talking about there. Obviously, customer experience and employee experience. And it's well known that employee experience has a knock-on effect to customer experience and vice versa, because if you've got really angry customers all the time, then you are going to find that the employee experience is also difficult. So a fact here for you, so companies that excel in CX are 150% more likely to have engaged employees. And as we're talking about the bottom line here, we all know that if you've got engaged employees, you're much likely to have less churn, and bringing employees on, onboarding them, training them, keeping them, rewarding them, all costs money. So if you can keep your employees engaged, then that is the way forwards. And obviously it massively impacts on the service that the customers receive. And for some companies, that link can be quite tenuous, especially if the customers are further away from the teams. But others, the data does directly correlate. And if you put your data between employee engagement and customer engagement side by side, quite often you'll see the direct links. Okay, so on to the next slide. So who are MKL CX? I won't read all that out to you, that's there, but I'm just going to talk about 2 quick case studies today. So one of them is MKL, which is why I've got the MKL logo there for you. And the other one is Home Retail Group, which I touched on earlier. So one will be around tech and CX, which is MKL, and the other one is around retail and EX, employee experience. So MKL, as Jonathan already fantastically introduced for us, MKL are an Internet of Things company. They were actually my first big client when I first went out on my own as a CX consultant. And they employed me to run a CX audit of their operation. And that's not something that happens very often in tech. So for a company to really engage in the CX side and really recognize that actually that is a differentiator was really fantastic to see. And MKL have a really amazing and unique culture. I've actually enjoyed the culture so much that I've ended up joining MKL for the long term. So hopefully that'll come through as I talk, because I'm quite passionate about the culture and how things work directly, because the customer centricity really impacts the bottom line, hugely successful company, and also the employee experience alongside that. So the founders are from Yorkshire. Mark is actually on the phone. I'm sure you may hear him speak later. And I'm from down south. So there is a bit of a divide there. I don't always understand what the team are saying, and equally the same for me. So I have had to work quite hard to make sure I understand the culture, how it works, what will work for them, what will work for the different employees, such as the engineers, for example, and how we make sure that anything that is to do with the customer experience side is written in a way that really works and lands well with the team. So you'll see a bit more of that about that on the next slide. But everything they do is about CX. So MKL recruit for customer empathy and service, even those who are back of the house teams, such as your system architects or your developers, are all based around the recruitment and the training of customer experience and customer service. And they've had huge growth because of it. So I just go to the next slide. So service behaviours, this is part of the MKL CX strategy. And this is what I was talking about when I said it needed to match the culture and the brand of a company. So if you can see here, when I originally went to the MKL leadership team, I said, okay, here's some fundamental behaviours that I think are CX basics. Let's have a chat about these. And they said, great, but that's not the way we talk. Can we MKL it up? And as you can see here, that some of the way this is written in the way that engineers speak, the same banter, the same words they'd use when they're out and about in their vans. And that's why it works for them. That's why it lands, because they adopt this. It's not something stuffy or corporate. So if you are in the same sort of situation where you need to build something for employees to make it land so they understand how to deal with customers, you might need to do some employee personas. So often we do customer personas, but don't always remember to do the employee ones. And for this one here, this is all built around an engineer. So having a customer and an employee persona can help you know who you're designing the processes with and who it's for. And co-creation. So it just helps with adoption and engagement. And I've seen that firsthand. It's very much with the team and not done to the team. And this dramatically improves your chance of successful execution and embedding. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, a bit more about co-creation. So I've got the Harvard Business Review's thoughts on it there about bringing in a unique blend of ideas from customers or viewers, which gives a plethora of new ideas for the organisation. You can imagine if you get a whole new of ideas coming in, some of those are going to provide revenue. And the same if you've got a whole cohort of people coming together and different parties, they're going to be able to produce a mutually valued outcome. But one of the key steps for co-creation, which is another word for collaboration, I guess, really, if it's new to you, is about making sure you've got the right people at the right time. And that needs to be representative of the decision makers, users, frontline teams, definitely the customers, the tech teams. And you do need to have people who can think far enough ahead, think and have the breadth and creativity to come up with the right ideas to build a CX or EX strategy or plan for the future. And hackathons are really great for doing this, but they have to match the culture. If you haven't come across hackathons before, it's basically about a very fast-paced, creative day where you come up with a problem and you're all enabled together to solve it. They can be a hell of a lot of fun, and you come out with a prototype at the end, which is a way of solving that and finding a solution, a working solution normally, and it's just a fantastic way to co-create and bring other people along with you to fix any employee or customer issues. The other thing you can do is look for opportunities to optimize your processes. So that could be looking at bottlenecks or customer pain points or employee pain points, and doing that together and building those into those days. You don't need to call it a hackathon, but just run it in a way where people can get together off-site, where they can really focus on solving issues. Okay, co-creation in practice, where to start. So often we do really good customer experience mapping, but we don't always do the employee version. If you can do both and you can overlap the employee and the customer one, as I've shown here with the pink arrow, you'll often find that the down points for both employee and customer actually mirror each other. And if you add the emotions, obstacles, thoughts, highs and lows for each of them, you'll really understand where you should start. So if you think, actually, I'd quite like to do a hackathon, but I have no idea where I would start, you could overlay your maps, overlay those pain points, and there you know that you've got the biggest outcome, because it's an area that's actually going to cause pain for both customer and employee. And it's often around business process or finance that you find these pain points. So do ensure you've got the right people to support the co-creation of a solution on hand. So a few more tools for you. I always talk about Gemba walks because they're my absolute favourite. And this is observing your operation. So you involve your employees on fixing the touch points that are painful for them and their customers. Service safaris, they're similar, but this is where you experience your own service as the user. So I also refer to that as eating your own dog food, because you're very much shopping your own shop. And another one that I only came across quite recently, actually, is appreciative inquiry. And this is where, instead of kind of saying what works for you, what doesn't work for you, you really turn it up a notch in a really positive way. So you might say to an employee, tell us about a time when you were truly empowered to deliver exceptional CX, or when did a customer or colleague last thank you, and what was it that led up to that happening? And that then really gets them into that mindset of thinking in quite a creative and very positive way. So on to my next little case study, which is Home Retail Group. So I'm very aware this is a very UK-based case study, but hopefully as I talk through, you can see that it would work elsewhere. So I mentioned about the colleague advocate team. So I had the lead role on that, and I report into an exec sponsor, which I can't tell you how much that helped us with momentum. We had a small budget, only 100K, but the things that we were able to do with that, because we were enabled and set up so well, really meant that we had quite a lot of achievements. So the structure of this was 2 people from each department across Group, Argos, Homebase and Habitat. And they, the 2 advocates would then be tasked to bring the voice of the employee back to each meeting and put forward suggestions that would improve employee engagement. And the fantastic thing about the team structure and the sponsorship was the momentum and the energy that we had. The CEO of Home Retail Group involved us in his transformation program, meaning that one of our first projects as a team was to come together and align the values across each of those brands, because they're all fairly different, although they're all customer facing and all retail, and to align the culture of all the brands. We also were able to put in a cycle to work scheme, the bike lockers that you can see there at the top. We lobbied the council for fair parking prices, ran charity and social events. Each of these projects was pretty big, but what they all had in common was that we could hear the employee voice throughout. And gradually, as we started delivering, started listening and started landing stuff, we found that more and more colleagues would then come to us and say, actually, do you know what, you're really making a difference? Can I join you, or can I put this idea forwards? And it really did help that well-being piece, that customer and employee engagement became really strong, and the culture of especially Argos really went high, because colleagues really felt heard. So it was just a fantastic cycle of engagement. So we were also part of the first ever Customer First Day. So Customer First was one of the values that we came out with as we completed that first project. So you can see this rather dodgy picture of me in my high vis here. That was me on my stand, which was actually a van for the day, as I was trained for a customer delivery driver, so I could map and optimize that journey alongside the delivery drivers. There's quite a lot involved, but it was all about driving employee engagement. Okay, diversity and inclusion, I'll just touch on this very briefly because it was something that Argos did in a really big way. So I had a big roadshow that went around all of the Argos sites, all the contact centres, all distribution centres, etc. It was really well measured, and steps were taken to encourage everyone to be their real selves at work. And obviously, if you can be your real self and you're not trying to hide anything or worry about any bias at work, then you can find ways to serve customers, encourage business growth. Leadership. So nearly at the end now, guys, but leadership. So not everybody realizes as a leader how impactful they can be, and that can be in both a positive or a negative way. And I remember working for a large corporate and sitting right at the back of the department, sort of facing in, and the team in front of me had a particularly charismatic leader. When he was good, he was very, very good, very empowering, very engaging, very insightful. But you know where I'm going with this. He was quite prone to moods, and when he was in one, none of his team dared to speak. And you can imagine what that did for employee engagement and obviously customer engagement. But other times there was so much energy and vibrancy. And for me, the impact that he had on his team and the wider culture was just fascinating to watch. Other times, the impact that leaders have are not quite so obvious at first, like KPIs, for instance. If there's something like just serve as many customers as you can possibly get through, that sounds okay. But as soon as you then start putting that into practice and pushing that and measuring that in a big way, you end up getting the sort of situation that you have when you're in Aldi checkouts, where you've got to be careful that a corned beef tin doesn't fly at your head because of the speed of service there. And we're all responsible for employee and customer experience in some form or another, but it's really vital to make sure that you've got a leader who is completely accountable for the whole end-to-end experience of both the customer and the employee experience. And these are often two very different people who's responsible for these. But if you have got somebody who ties the two together and aligns them, then that is really important. Otherwise, you can end up pulling in two different directions. Culture. So I've already touched on culture there. I talked about MKL and I've already talked about leaders, but culture is normally driven from the top, and what the leaders encourage, reward and tolerate is what ends up being the culture of a company. And if you get it right, you end up with a unicorn, but you get it wrong and you've more likely got a rotten apple. So it's super important, especially to employees and their experience, and then what they take down the line to our customers. So if you're trying to build strong CX and EX inside your company, you'll need to really bring the key decision makers along with you. If they're not on board, you're going to be pushing water uphill. And I think the reason MKL has been so successful is the leader there really strongly believes in CX and customer experience, and that's why things land. So everything I've mentioned so far will really affect business growth. Happy employees stay, they work hard, they go above and beyond. The service level improves, they believe in the company, they believe in the service, they believe in the product. And because of that, it means that they sell. And if they sell, then you end up with more on your bottom line. You've got profit, they come up with revenue generating ideas. So you really can't underestimate the power of the people aspect on the bottom line.
CX Centric Conversation.